tables are very small, so you clean them.
2nd of Shvat.
Tables are very
Samech Vav.
cleaning them.
That's what's good. That's the problem. There's plenty of people who take the initiative. All right. So we saw the answer to the kasha that how can the Aveda of the Rusu of the Iba, how can that be higher than the Inyan HaMoich? We saw that Leis Machashovet Fisa Bay
Cloud.
Cloud. Yeah, Leis Machashovet Fisa Bay Cloud. And Davke, the Rusu of the Iba, we saw that the Atzmus was not fast. We saw that he became Alidei, the Aveda, the Atzmus, the Liebe, we all status in the Atzmus. So we discussed the Mila of the Midas, Mitzad the Shoyrosh. Ein noch anamim, the Gilui HaDvarim, then the Midas HaMekabel from the Moichin. That's to say the Haveda, what the Eberste placed in the Nefesh HaAdam, how it is Bekolui, that the Moichin HaMa'ira and Mekale, the Midas. It's not the types that they bring the Midas in the being. The Midas have their own shurish, and they're there in the Nefesh, and they have a higher shurish than the Inyan HaMoich. And we discussed the whole Inyan of Atika versus the Inyan of the Cyrus, what they're Nimshochim. from Arik, what that's Chitzenius HaKesa, and Davke the Midas, the Af, the Begolui, the Melodim, and Aseichel, over their shurish, is Davke in Pnimis Ve'atzmi Sakesa Finas Atika Mamish. So we saw that mitzad the Shoyrosh Kodu of the Midas, and they have the ability to unite with the Atzmas, because the Indian Atik is well known, the beer in the Russian Atik, and this is what Atik is for Russian Neatak. Or it's written by Romovin by Yatek Mishom Hehoror that he moved over from there in the direction of the mountain. But that means something was drawn or moved in another area altogether. But that's the Indian of Atik, means how the Abish, the Kavioch Biatzmusai, makes a shaykhas and the Yerida to the beginning of the whole Seder of the Neatzolik. Remember, that's the union of what we call Bechina Tachtoina Sheba Atzmusa is brought. It's brought down in the Lashon HaRizal. So therefore the union of Atik is very high. His scholars, Mamish of Atzmusa is brought. And therefore, Alidei the Midas, what their Sherish is in Atik, it's possible to be Teifus, Kaviochel in the union of Atzmus Mamish. Alidei Ha'ava Zu, the Pchinas Rusa Taliba. We're now on Samech Aleph near the Samech down further on the page. Validei Ha'avazu, the Pchinas Rusa Taliba. Ma'mele Bechinas Kiyum HaMitzvah Shachachach B'chol Yom Hu the Pchinas Kabbalas El Malchus Shamayim. What is the meaning of Kabbalas El Malchus Shamayim? B'li Shum Mevukesh Li'atzmei, without having any requested theme for himself. B'li Shum Mevukash Li'atzmo. The word Vakesh means to request or to search. Mevukash is like a noun made out of a form of super passive of the verb, past passive, Mevukash. But a Mevukash means that you're looking for something. When you're doing a certain Indian, it could be you do it B'Shleimas, but you have a certain hope and request in it for your own Inyonim as well. But he said, when you do the mitzvahs in an open Kabbalah's oil, then you don't have any Mevukesh Le'atzma. In other words, if it's going to be Kabbalah's oil VMS, then you're not looking for any own motive or fulfillment or, how do you call it, spiritual experience for Ka'etz B'zeh. In the Indian of keeping of the mitzvahs, not even if a very strong one, somebody shakes your hand and No, it's all due respect. What I mean to say is that in the Barish, there's no masquerade, Kavod, so Baruch Hashem, you know, Beli Shum Vukish Liatman. That's a lot about, but anyway. It's Yitzhak and I, we manage. Is Beli Shum Vukish Liatmoi. So, Kiyim Mitzad HaRotzen Ha'elyein Levad. Purely mitzad the rotzen of the Eibishter, lekayim retoinoi, only to do his will. Not only to do it, but as it were to fulfill it. Yeah, lekayim. Lekayim means to how do you call it? Permanize it, make it permanent, make it be the only real, living, eternal value, as you might say. Lekayim retoinoi. So now that's a very amazing statement, even though it's brief, but it has a lot to tell us. So I asked the question, why, because of this hour that you've reached of Rusa Daliba, Mamela, it seems almost to follow. What Mamela means, it's like automatic, it follows automatically in a way that the keeping of the mitzvahs is in a form of Kabbalah, Oil Malchus Shemayim, and in that, the perfection of Oil Malchus Shemayim, in that it's Bli Shum Mavukish Liatmei Ki'im Purely Mitzad Kiyum Harot. So, Kilo, what's the connection line? Why would we say, one automatically leads to or promotes the other? So therefore we have to go back to this we saw in B'chol Miyoidecha. We saw that it was B'chol Bovcha, B'chol Nafshecha, and then we saw that it was B'chol Miyoidecha. So we saw that B'chol Bovcha, that's for your Indian, both of your hearts. But the Mishnah in such a broad might say quite high, because you've even got your Tahara involved. B'chol Bovcha, Mishnei Torecha. That's quite a high madrega, but it's for you. Yeah, B'chol Bovcha, with your heart. Called nafshecha, with your whole being, with your whole soul. B'chol mi'oidecha implies the idea of your bligvul. Mi'oid means much. So wherever you put the word mi'oid, then you blow the quantity of it. Yeah? So it's mi'oid, then you're out of gvul. And so b'chol mi'oidecha, albeit it's your bligvul, it's your individual inyan, but it's your going out of all limitation. We said that was the Ava of Rusa Deliba. We connected the two. And we saw that Rusa Deliba was BMS, the Avas Aben El Av in the Moshe. So the devotion of Aben to Av is, his devotion is to a certain extent, without any, what you might call reflections or, things that he's depending it on. Because like we saw was Etzem Echad. But he knows very well, that his father's relation to him is also, Beli T'nai. The father didn't wait for certain inyanim before he did everything that was possible to care for him, but he just did it, mitzad the pashtus and the shlemus of the human situation, that's his ben. And when it comes to the ben mitzad Yav, then the ben just does whatever his father tells him. We're not talking about later on when there's already a shleimus hadas by the ben. Then there's certain things that the father will tell him which are not al pitera, for example, that he's not required to obey him, etc., etc. We talk about the etzem hanocha in the nefesh of the ben. As a miller, by him it's also beli t'nai. It's not dependent in any given conditions or any inyonim where he would have something for himself. Therefore, we see that in Tanya, in about at least 2 places, 3, even in Sefer Shalbeiman, the Alter Rebbe brings down the famous statement of the Rea Mehemna, that's Moshe Rabbeinu. But he says that the Ava to the Eibishter should be an Ava from Gebro to Mishtadl Bosa Ovi Ve'imoy. He brings it in Perikut when he's talking about the tzaddikim, as you're probably familiar. Or if you're not, you can be familiar. is what over there the Alter brings it that a son runs and does everything for his father and mother. Good state for the mother also. Geworden Mishtal was over the Imoi, Moser, Garme, Venafshe, Alehoin, Yellow Mifrachloin, Hashpialoin, all many sorts of Lashenes, that the son would do just anything for his parents. He's completely given away, and he would give himself completely away for their necessity, whatever it might happen to be their necessity. I mean, we see that the Indian at the Yachas to the son, which are the pnimis of the Indian, not what might mix in certainly yonim, Alpi Haseichel Vatas. The pnimis of Indian is absolute devotion to whatever their necessity may be, bli his boniness or bli hesitation, cloud. And I say we see it like that. That's the Yachas of Bonim Lehorehem al der Harogim, because that's the Amiti Shainin. Therefore, if the Penimius of a Chobi Yodelcha is Rusa Deliba, and Rusa Deliba we saw was this Indian of the Moshul, and the way to explain that and to describe it is the Yachas of the Ben to the Av, then it follows that if the Av does express what his will is, and he says clearly a ordered description of his will, will meaning his desire, what he wants, not his will, but his rotzen. So then the Ben is given over and devoted to that will without any question, without looking for himself. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu says, that the Amiti Sav of Knesset Yisrael, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is beli shum mehukash herikot the mishtadel bos over imoid beli shum tonight to do anything would be for their requirement. That's what the Rabbi means here. If you aroused in the Amiti Sa'inya of this oisim reteinoi shel mokei, we mamshit the inen of reteinoi lamata, what the av necessary for that, the dvekis which brings to us, we use it to liba, then the way you do the mitzvahs is purely mitzad rotzen ha'ediyah. But not because you're looking for anything, you're not seeking and so chayat. Therefore, the devotion to the Indian that the Kiyam HaMitzvahs is beli gvul. It's an anointing from Leloi Kol T'nai, Leloi Kol Mavukish Le'atzmei. But that's the Indian of Kabbalah Bel Malchus Shemai. Okay, my Cain says the Rebbe B'Matan Torah. We find that was the beginning of the whole coming about of the Jewish people, which occurred B'Emes V'Amiti B'Matan Torah. Even though Yidden were already there long before that, but the Amitias, Hisavas of the Jewish people, was Matan Torah. Yeksiv Kol Asher Diber Havaya Na'aseh V'Nishma. This is the famous principle of Na'aseh V'Nishma, which is so famously connected with Matan Torah. Ki hoyo ha'pnimi sholehem koshur b'bchinas ha'atzmiyos. Al kein omu kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma. Hainu na'aseh kol ma shenishma. Shehu lamayla min ha'tam. But that's something completely beyond reason. V'hu al yidei b'chinas rusa deliba davke. So notice that the Rebbe says that there was a hakdoma to Matan Torah also, even to Na'aseh V'Nishma. There was a hakdoma that they became makusha, ha'ayu kshurim, Knesset Yisrael was Boise Azman, was kosher b'bchinas atzmiyos. And therefore it was possible for them to say Na'aseh V'Nishma. So what is the union that atzmiyos was kosher? I'm sorry, they were kosher b'chinas ha'atzmiyos. Where do we see that? We see that from the union of Kol Hashem, Om Hashem, Diber Hashem Na'aseh V'Nishma. That kill was these kashrus. So where do we see the union of these kashrus? There be atzmiyos prior to that, prior to the union of the actual person. Any suggestions?
Moshe?
Huh?
Moshe Rabbeinu?
Moshe Rabbeinu? Yeah, well, Moshe Rabbeinu, he's Moshe Rabbeinu. But
Abraham?
Abraham. Well, yeah, I see what you guys are hopping on the leaders, the Ike Manhige Israel, the Ike, always Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was mamshik this Indian in there, don't you saw it? But Moshe Rabbeinu was mamshik that Indian in there. Yeah, aber yeah, where do we see the two they were kosher b'ha'achmiyos?
Could it be from the fact that Hashem revealed himself to them?
Oh, very nice. In other words, if you want to suggest that Ein Hanami, but it came Milmaila Lamata. That's a very intelligent suggestion. To a certain extent, I'm Kabbalah. In other words, what happened was that there was such an amazing Gilui, Milmaila, that caused the Eden to be kosher b'ha'achmiyos. But they couldn't have been Matan Torah until they mikuat that his kashrus in the atzmas, that they did something, or they, as it were, pronounced something, or they made clear something, and that was the Eden for Nasa v'nishma. And that was that Nasa v'nishma is not the etzem meaning of the rules of the liba. No, Nasa v'nishma is the outcome of a matter which is like rules of the liba. It's only the Matan Torah Hanami. We could suggest that was a Eden that was done for the Mil Maila. That's what we see. That the whole Eden from Matan Torah, from Yetzias Mitzrayim, and the whole Eden of what we saw in the Shir Klali, the Eden from the Esamakis, and the Seder, the Esamakis, and the Ephah. And then there's a continuation in this week's parasha. And we see the unbelievable Gila, the Etzem Yetziyah in Mitzrayim, to the point of Kriyas Yam Suf, that's a shleimus of Yetzias Mitzrayim. But there they saw, Mamish is brought that Etzem HaOlam HaAtzilas, according to the Arizal, was Yered Lamata, was Miskale, Mamish Bezer HaOlam. Yam Nasel Yabosha, the Pnimias. And the hidden in Yonim and Elikus became Chitzainis Kaviok, they became Begolo. The Yidden was swept into us. I mean, Indian of Beetle, Goma, Ela Atzmus, that it was Kilo Milmaila. That reaches its final Emeskite in the Indian of Kofa Aleim Har Kigigis. You know the famous, you're not familiar with that famous principle, Ken May.
Since you said that this believer isn't triggered by his holiness, did you say that every time?
It's him. We pointed out earlier that's nachon. That's why I'm saying these things. It can come no matter. He would study in these bonds of the other, it's not able to come pure. It can be assisted. And so therefore we see what was one of the inyonim that really preceded the whole inyan of Matan was that the Gemara says in Sekta Shabbos in the Sugya for Matan Torah, the Gemara says that Kofo Aleihem Har Kigigitz, that the Eibishter literally turned the mountain upside down like a barrel, and he slammed it over them, and he said, "Yeah, poi tehei either Makabel the Torah or poi tehei Kuras Kevin. This will be your burial yard." And said, "Idi received the Torah." So everybody says, "The Gemara says, I wish it would, but that's pretty hard going. I picked up the mouth." So the Gemara says, "Yeah, Imachanami, that the Kabbalah Sateros, to a certain extent, it was forced on them, and only B'yamei Purim, B'yamei Mordechai V'Esther, took generations. That was where they were Mekavu Be'em Islamite Mitad Atzmo." And Tesis brings over the that was because of the Nesser Purim Mitad Avos HaNes, that they were Mekavu Atzmo. Yeah, Begoli Yasai. Come Tesis, there was a senior from Kof Aleim Har Kikigis. Comes again, Siddur. Siddur says, what does it mean? I mean, they used to pick up the mountain and jammed it down on top of him and said, you're going to receive the Torah or Ochavei. What sort of a Indian is that? So Siddur says that Har, the Pnimis Indian Har indicates Ahava. Har is indicative of Ahava. Because har is a thing that goes upwards. It sort of, how do you call it, yearns upwards, but that's the in for now. It's like written by Aaron according to his name is centered around the word har, Aharei. He's got an aleph and he's got a nun at the end. The aleph is the Eibishter, the nun is a nun Sophia, that's the indicative comes from mata. In the middle is a har, but the har is in for now also. It's very similar to this aleph we're talking about here. The har and the kohen, when he lit the neiros in the mikdash, he lit up the har, which shows saw. Anyway, the Eibishter came along just before Matan Torah, and he was megale such an ahava to the Yidden, the ahava mitzad atzmei, the ahava of a father to a son, the tuich of ahava, the ahava to the ben, and he literally jammed it down on him. And remember when they saw that unbelievable ahava of the Eibishter to the Yidden, and they saw that this was an ahava out of a chatonim mikol ha'amim. This is an everlasting ahava that can never be altered. And the Yidden just said, the Chayva say we're going straight to Matan Torah. In other words, that it looks as if Pekolo is if it was forced. But it wasn't really forced because they did it with a tremendous gishmak. Because he revealed his unbelievable gishmak in the Neshamas of the Yidden. And it's called forcing because it's like the whole beer why the angels don't have any bechira. Consider the angels don't have any bechira. We find in many places that there are such things as angels having had or expressing al kaponim bechira, etc., etc. So the beer is that they have so much kilui, and that everything by them is so begolur, it's not really shaykh that you could do otherwise. But in a very delicate way, maybe they could do otherwise. And therefore, mitzad echad ein lehem bechira, mitzad sheni yesh lehem. The same with the Yidden, that it was called kofar, that they actually forced the mountain on their heads, kaviyochel, because of the ava that he showed to them was so immense and so unlimited that if you see a zamin ava from your father to you, they just can't avoid it. There's no way. Yeah, you have to go. And therefore the Gemara says, that's not really ever a kabbalah satira, is it? Oh, he's so they did it from a zamin ava that was just so obvious. So therefore, if Bisman put him, they had to go through it all over again, and then they had to be mekabel be'emes mitzad atzmon, because then the ava wasn't kokak. I mean, it was working and functioning, but it wasn't kokak v'koloi. That was left up to them. They had to say, either way or Achmon in Itlan. We're talking around the Eibishter were with the Eibishter. That was in what's the Gemara? Kumto is that before they actually said Ma'asav and Nishma, they had Avarab. They had Avarab in the form of Yusuf the Lieber. There was Kuraf and Gewaldik and Oifen. The only thing is that it came to a certain extent no Milo of Al they had it. And then we queered that Avarab, we queered that even for Yusuf the Lieber. Then they said Na'asav and Nishma, in other words, that their relationship to all the mitzvahs was Lamaila Mi'ah Tam. Lamaila Mi'ah Tevaka. And I asked the Shaila, where do we see here in the Lashon that the Rebbe brings here? He says, Kalafit Diba Hashem Naisla Nishma, Hainu, Naaseh Kol Mashe Nishma, Shehu Lamaila Mi'ah Tam. Who are the day Pchinas Rusa the Liebe Davke? The bi'av al yidei hasoger should be al yidei hasoger, not al yidei zeh, but al yidei hasoger. Afil madrega hayoyse el yoina. K'may bi'av or ava de mili b'shomayim b'chinas kiyum ha'mitzvahs dachachach ula hamshich oyer. Yeah, you want to do something, you want to get something, you want to bring down something into the world light, you want to elevate yourself, you want to illuminate your life, you want to illuminate the world, so you want to be mamshich oyer. Alacha b'chinas rusta liba in a kiyum ha'mitzvahs b'chinas kaboz el malchus shamayim rak l'kayim ritzoyno yiz bara. Where's that written in those words? Yeah, that kol asher naaseh kol masher nishma shehu l'mayla mi'atam, and that was only through those of the leader that they could have said that. With the way it's written here, would appear that kol asher Naaseh kol asher nishma. So whatever, they said, okay, we'll do. Now let's hear, So we'll hear, and then I'm sorry, we'll do. It was the first thing. Then whatever we informed, and we've already agreed that we'll do it. So why is that l'mayla mi'atam? So we could say here it's inyan. Why it's considered l'mayla mi'atam? The evil say that it was just purely the inyan nase versus or faced with or over and against or whatever else we like to use the inyan nishma. So we could say that the world of understanding and hearing something and the world of doing are two separate worlds altogether. And it could be a lot of inyanim, you understood a lot of amazing inyanim. I would say you're going to do all of that. That is going to become part of your olam hamaisa. And that's a tremendous step, a tremendous jump. One to the other. However, that's a close. In other words, that nishma doesn't in any way machayev naaseh. It's a lot of machayev at the club. However, that's a separate jump and a separate inyan all on its own. But what the Rebbe means here is a slightly different inyan. That's what we find. But the Gemara is medaktek. If you look in the Gemara, the Sugya, the Gemara says that the Malachi Ashores, they came down, they heard the Yidden, and they heard them say that they were the Bishash, Hikdimu, Yisrael, Naisel and Nishma. In other words, he was what they put nicer before Nishma. In other words, that they said, we will do everything over here. You understand? So you might say, that's a big jump, it's a wondrous thing. The Nakuda was that they put the doing before the hearing. And I said the Gemara over there, the Gemara brings it. There was once who was talking to a goy, and he said, "You guys are, oh, that's right." He said, "I see you guys are still the same crazy Yidden." So he said, "Well, what? Oh, that's right." He saw Rava was learning in the base of Medrash. Now you guys get some idea what he was learning. In the old days, he was learning with such tremendous power that he had his thumb under a table or something. He was crushing his thumb or something. His thumb was giving out blood, and he was just so taken up with his learning he didn't notice it. So the guy said to him, "Oh, I see you're not the same crazy Yidden as you were, X years ago." So he says, "Well, you're my height. What do you mean with that?" So he says that the B'Shas Matan Torah, he said, "You guys were crazy." He said, "Achdimu pumayhu liudnayu." He said, "Achdimu pumayhu liudnaichu." He said, "You put your mouths before your ears." He said, you got in first with your mouths before your ears. And he said, "That's crazy." He said, "I see you guys are the same crazy guys." In other words, that you don't put your mouth before your ear. First of all, you hear what is it that they want of you, and then you say, "Oh yes, I'll do it." But if you say, "Oh yes, I'll do it," and then, "Oh, by the way, what is it that you wanted me to do?" Then you never know what you might be. You never know what you might be told, but you've already committed yourself, and you've already said, "I'm gonna do." That's a iskashus atzmius shelamayla mea antara. That's what the Alter Rebbe said in the Kutetera, Pasha Baha, that if the Abishah would have told us to draw water and chop wood for the rest of all the generations to come, Al Chof Kol Ha'olam, then we would have done it with the same simcha that we sit in the sukkah, that we put on tefillin. We did exactly the same simcha, because the inyan for Nase Koydem Lenishma means that we put the Nase, we didn't know the heck what. That's what this guy said, that you put your mouths in it. You open your big mouth. Excuse the expression. Pumaichu kodmu udnaichu. Udnaichu is in the Aramaic means the ears. You put your mouth before your ears. So that's what the Rebbe means here. They said, Naaseh kol hashenish ma. In other words, we'd already put down the Naaseh. That's already been decided. In other words, it's not the mile of Naisa over Nishma. A mile of that there is a mile of Naisa over Nishma. But we will also maktim the Naaseh and Nishma. We put that first. That was killed the Iker condition with the Abish. First of all, we're going to do, and then we'll hear Kolesha Nishma. So who knows what Kalasha Nishma? Nobody has any hasoga what that's going to be. Ba'isa harega. Remember, that's even from Kabbalah Sa'il. That's the immediate scene from Kabbalah Sa'il. Meaning that Yidden were committed to retaining his bara, whatever that rotten would be. Beli Kol. So that's a sign that they had no request for them, for themselves. Yeah, they had no union in that whatsoever. Only rotten havaya. So where did that come from? So that it came from the fact that they already had reuse of the Liebe, they already had this ahava and this geschmack and this devotion to the Eibishter, even for the Yisraelis, ha'ahava that.
But isn't this having this ahava in itself having something for yourself?
Oh, that's a very nice, that's a very good question. Yeah, it is. That's what we're about to say in another section. The Rebbe says that. Therefore, the Rebbe says, if the devotion of Rusat Liba means you're just completely devoted to the Eibishter, mitzad the union of the Avs Ben El Av, then that's the union from Kabbalah Seir. Ma kilo Hevdil Ben Zela. Why do we say that? That's only a Hakdoma, but the Ike is the Kabbalah's oil. So we're going to see that there's Afro became a difference. So it's not much the same thing. That's what he says now. Yeah, but if you're devoted, mitzad the how do you call it? Ava, which is alpitan v'hasoger, there's some understanding and his bondness was brought to the Ava, then it can be a very great Ava, but ultimately it's in order to bring down a light, to illuminate something, whether it be yourself or whether it be the world around you. So there's a certain, what you might call, motivation which is there in the Adon, and he benefits from that. So that was the Rebbe, that even in the Ava, from how do you call it, Demi Liba Shamayim V'im Chalei Chofatzti, we said earlier that was the Ava of Yivil Nishtang and Eivil Nishtang Dichalein. That's a very, very hard trait. The Alter Rebbe said that in Azarim, that's considered the Baker's Nifla of Atzuma. And yet, nonetheless, we see here that the Ava of all Yidden, even from Rusa to Liba, is higher. It's a deeper and higher form of Aha. So that asks itself the question, but it's a question we'll have to leave to another point. Why is the Ava Rusa Liba higher even than that? I mean, what could you possibly have more than that? But who do I have? I don't want anything only as Dicha Lein. Das ist klar, Dicha Lein. A gewaltige Hiskala is an Ahava. Nonetheless, we say that that's in order to be Mamshich Oyer. There's still a certain Inyan there, but it's Lahamshich Oyer. But Inyan Kabbalah Seil, and that's what we're not going to see this Nakuda which you Moyer to your question. The Inyan Kabbalah Seil Malchu Shamayim. Hine by Madrigas Habitul Hula Maila Gam Mimchinus Ahava the Bechol Midercha Shemitzad Aish Kashrut. The Mikol Mochim He Bechilus Ahava V'Rotzoi. V'Kabbalah Seil Malchu Shamayim Hu Bechilus Bitul Yoiser. Therefore, Hu HaMaila Sheyesh Be'ever the Gam Al Madrigas Ben Chulu Akamosh is Boer. Now Akamosh is Boer. That's going to be hundreds of pages further down, mamish hundreds of pages further down the line. So we can see that this whole Hemshech, that the Rebbeim, when they said Hemshech, it was all kilo, how do you call it, pre-meditated. It was all in their heads, It was all just unfolding with all these unbelievable details, because Kamoshi is boy, that's hundreds of pages down the line. But what is he mazbal there? That there's a mile in the madreg of the Eved Poshut, the simple Eved, even over somebody that he's like Mamish Bugolo, we are Ben, and I mean always upon him, Pinimis over there's somebody that he's a waiter to a Bugolo, like a Ben, and he just moves around in the house, he was just stupid, and he just he knows everything, and everything is Bugolo by him, and he's Makuru validated like a Ben, there's still a mile in the Indian from Kabbalah Shalom Malchus portion of the Eved portion. So the Rebbe says why? Because he said if we're going to say that you talk about the Sahaba that came Kof Aleim HaKigigas. Ultimately, when you have Ava, I feel you have Ava by the Rusa de Liebe. I feel it's in a name from Ben Ala Ava. When it's given the name Ahavo, that means that there's some emotional fulfillment, some, how do you call it, emotional expression. We won't say necessarily fulfillment. You're not really looking for it to fulfill anything, but also upon there's a certain, what you might call arousal of a gishmak, an Indian of Yisairas of gishmak. What's yours to it? We're about to finish. So therefore there's a certain Yisairas upon him of a gishmak. Geschmack in Yiddish means a taste. And a fire, that's a great thing. And it's unlimited. And it's a necessity, because we see the beliefs there, we can't really get to this ultimate Indian Kabbalah. So, over the Indian of the bittul Shabbatot, if we take the word bittul, what does bittul mean? Bittul means self-nullification. But that's not my own translation. Many years ago, I had one of my Talmudim, I met him when I was in America, we had the Shabbaton in New Jersey. He was there for the whole Shabbos. He once got up in the middle of one of the classes, he put up his finger, he said, I've worked out what bittul is. He said, bittul is self-nullification. That's very beautiful when you think of it. That's what the word bittul is. Anyway, suffice it to say, the self-nullification that there is in Kabbalah Malchus Shamayim, in the actual doing of the nice Kodim Lanishma, even though you can't really reach it unless you have the Ava Sheperusa to Liba, or in the actual doing it, the giving yourself away, believe Shum Mavukish, believe Shum Inin Le'achmach Klau, Rak Lekayim, what he wants, as they say in Yiddish, was Ervil, what he wants. Oh, this is a bittul kol muhushka b'Yisrael, nullification legamri of the soul. In dem prat, it's even higher than the thing that brings it about, because the thing that brings it about is ayin for going out of the self of a soul. So there is a certain realization of the self, or a certain time, albeit a very elevated time. Like one of the Chassidim once said, that in order to get to that time, you've got to give away all the other times that there are. In order to get to that time. Although it is a form of time. He said the bittul is only in Kabbalah. The immediate musag, the bitul of the self, self-nullification, that's only in the actual act of the Kabbalah self. There was a derivative. In that prat, the Kabbalah self, Malchus Shamayim, is higher. It's not the bittul. It's not an nimtzul if he's here. What determines what is higher and what is lower is ultimately it's the bittul shulchavara, because the emes is that einoid that there's no mitzvahs apart from the Eibishter. Now, the closer you come to the being of completely out mitzvahs, if there's no mitzvahs, cloud, then the more you've elevated yourself to Elikus, the more you become close and elevated to the union of Elikus. And therefore, that's the pshat, that the union from Kabbalah Zel, Malchus Shamayim, is higher mitzat the bittul. Because the union from bittul says, hey, no, milvade, but instead of just trumpetizing around saying, hey, no, milvade, you actually do it. You prepare mamish, you do the mitzvah purely because it's his will. And to be makayim, which you know is bara. Amela said that Rabbi doesn't go to a piladik zach. That's going to make the Eved Poshut even higher than the person who is obeyed Prince Ben. But in that Hemshech, much later on in the Hemshech, the Samech Vav, the Rebbe is Mavaya with great length, the tremendous mile of somebody he's called a Ben. I mean, we're all born in Mitzat the Pnimis Amishoma, or somebody who's Begolui, Mitzat Pnimis Nishmose Begolui, he's called a Ben. The Eved is in that respect even higher than him. So come to say that the highest of all the people is the simple. Now you get some idea why this is about Shem Tov, why he admired so much what he called the simple the simple Yidden. So good, the Yehudim HaPeshutim, because when they did a mitzvah, they did a pure mitzvah Tzoni as well. ויש להאריך בזה, אבל אין כאן המוקים אולי להאריך בזה. וזהו עניין אויסים רצוינוי של מוקים. That is the pshat, oisim retoinoi shel mokoim. In other words, we do from Ocean Asiya. What Asiya means, almost like a compulsion in a way. That's what the word Asiya means. Yeah, oisim retoinoi, yeah, the Avis is rotten, but we make it into mokim. We bring it down into the world, into mokim usma. Aham shibchinas rotzen ha'atzmi, the atzmus ain't safe mamish. In other words, the essential rotzen of the Abish, of atzmus, of the Abish, the mamish, to bring that down, b'golui, azel alidei ha'gomes b'chinas rusa de liba. He said, first of all, you have to have the hakdoma of rusa de liba, of this in van ava, auch upon him, even of his scholars. שזהו תויפס בבחינס העצמס דווקא כנ"ל, ועל ידי קיום המצווה אחר כך, בבחינס קבולה זהו מלכות שמיים, ממשיכים בבחינס רוצן העצמי שבמצווה. Yeah, the essential rotzen that there is in the mitzvahs, not in the union of the spheres and all those inyanim which are got to kavanas mitzvah. But the emes union of what is the purpose and the kavanah pnimis, the atzmi, mitzad atzmas ain't saved in the mitzvah. שעל ידי זה נמשך הגילוי גם למטה בבחינס מוקים of זמן. So I only ask yourself to Shiloh, why do you need to have the hour? Be Rusa de Liebe in order to reach that union from Kabbalah. So Mazel Shemaim, outside of Shleimus. When a man wakes up in the morning with the gun scene, he says, Moide Ani, that's a tremendous Kabbalah, so Mazel Shemaim. And when he just puts on tefillin, beli, shum, this, he does pure mitzvah, that's rotzen avaya. That's why why does he have to have this use of the liber? Why does that have to precede? Oh, I gotta go get this transport. But how is it that this union from Rusa to Liba, that this union from Rusa to Liba has to proceed in order to reach that union from Kabbalah Seah? So I mean, even from Beetle called Marusa. So if I was really cruel, I could say, well, that's what you got to sleep with that Shaila, that Kashi, maybe it'll help you to sleep in a better way and in a more gesundter and sinniger way, etc., etc. Yeah. But suffice it to say that in order to come down in the emes way, which means Beetle called Marusa, come back into the world to do things only with Rots and Avaya, then you got to get up off the ground. That's what they call Rotzoi v'Shoiv. And in all Madregas there's Rotzoi v'Shoiv. Only in Yonim there's a Nakuda Rotzoi v'Shoiv. How can you possibly do a mitzvah in a way that's only mitzvah Tzoni is barach, and you don't have anything in it for yourself, you're not in it, the cloud, nothing means anything to you. Only Kaviyachon, when you've gone up out of yourself and you've longed in some way for Atzma Sensei, and you've wanted that he should be B'kol. When you've got that, then you can step into the shoes whereby I say, I leave everything behind. Otherwise, there's always a little trace up there. The little, Thompson's famous story about all these villages that they wouldn't accept the trains. I said, no, there's no such thing as a train. Okay, there must be a little horse inside it there. Never told the story. It's, there's always a little weeny horse inside. That you're still on the ground. You're not really doing it. You have power that you want to go out only to the Abish. You have gishmak to get up off the ground and leave everything behind. But that's the emissary gishmak. Oh, then it's possible to forget about gishmak altogether. Then it's possible to say I'm doing it purely for time. Otherwise, you just you sit on the ground, and there's a famous sikha from the Rebbe in Cheder Gimel that you do. You can have Kabbalah Sel, but it's Kabbalah Sel also with a Kabbalah Sel. You know what he calls over there. How does he call it? In Kentucky, this week's parsha, I think he says he calls it over there. Eved Avodim, that you're like an Eved to the Eved. You're too much Eved. That's also not good. You got to be Eved, but you got to be with a brand instead of that. With a blivu, and that comes on the day the Hakdoma from the use of the Liba. So we'll talk about that more. Hashem. So you forgive me, but I could have got a bar mitzvah, one of the former Talmudim. He's kept a casual with us all the years, so I'm going to go to his simcha. So have a good evening. Today, beginning of